If all things go to plan, America's longest war will be ending later this month. After 20 years of conflict and a series of failed peace talks, the Taliban and Afghan government are still worlds apart towards any lasting political solution. Caught in the middle has been millions of Afghan refugees. Many have found shelter in neighboring Pakistan and Iran, but hundreds of thousands have also made their way to Turkey over the years. And with the Taliban's recent offensive, concerns are growing that millions more could make that dangerous journey on foot. Many are hoping to cross into Europe, but some EU leaders have called for the refugees to be settled in Turkey. Currently, nearly 4 million refugees, mostly Syrians, are in Turkey. 8 groups warn the country is hitting breaking point and that a new wave could overwhelm the already fragile system in place. Are there countries that could be helping out more? Have the EU, US, and wealthy Gulf states done enough to address this growing humanitarian crisis? And to answer that, joining me now from Istanbul is Ugur Yasin Asal. He is an associate professor and the head of the political science department at Istanbul Ticaret University. And from Oxford, Ruvi Ziegler. He is an associate professor of international refugee law at the University of Reading. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So following the US's abrupt withdrawal from Afghanistan, large tracts of rural areas and key cross-border areas have fallen to the Taliban control, forcing thousands of people to leave their homes. What could you tell us about the current situation in the country and where is this headed for these people?
And it clearly shows we are now living a power vacuum, again the withdrawal of the US, because as the US president announced that it was so immediate, and also President Ashraf Ghani blamed that the withdrawal of the US it's abruptly will directly be in a clash again between the Afghan government forces and the Taliban, and it directly reflects itself on the field, and more than thousands and 10,000s of refugees are moving through the
Yes.
Iran and such Central Asian countries as well.
Yeah. So just to give an idea of the scale of this humanitarian crisis, here are some figures. 270,000 Afghans have recently been displaced in the country this year only, bringing the total of displaced people to 3.5 million. And nearly 2 million Afghan refugees are now living in neighboring countries, Iran and Pakistan. So, Rumi, we also seen hundreds of Afghan refugees crossing into Turkey. What's next for these people? Are they likely to take more dangerous routes, maybe in order to reach Europe?
Right. So, I think history tells us that when there have been waves of refugees arriving in Turkey, that some of them try to make it to continental Europe in different ways, and we've seen this in particularly in the context of the Syrian civil war and the arrivals in Europe in 2015, 2016 of not just Syrians but primarily Syrians, and this is of course a context in which the politics of European refugee policies comes into the fore, and I imagine we'll come to that as well. I mean, the way in which the European Union is trying effectively to fend off a potential migration flow into Europe is arguably very worrying.
So also there are some other figures. We know that Turkey hosts the largest number of refugees in the world with nearly 4 million people, whereas Pakistan has nearly 1.4 million. And Lebanon, just a little tiny country, is hosting over 1.5 million refugees. So Ugur, why do you think Iran is letting those refugees in? Do you believe that there should be a more comprehensive cooperation among the countries to stem this flow? What needs to be done politically, for example?
Yes, exactly. That is what we need between Iran and Turkey. And as we know, which is the most historical agreement between Iran and Turkey, it was called Kasr-i-Shirin, and it was held in 1639. From this time, the Iranian border and Turkey are really secure. But in that time, now the Iran is facing some economic troubles, which also includes the sanctions of United States to Iran, and also COVID-19 crisis made this flow more speed, and it also reflects directly that Iranian government would like to send all these Afghans exactly towards the Turkish border. But we really need to remake this agreement within the changing dynamics of this new migration flow to Turkey. Because as we are now living, the migration becomes an international policy making tool.
Yes.
And it directly reflects both bilateral relations and the stability of the region. And Iran, Turkey, and Russia, this is one of the most three significant countries that really would like to make this region as secure as possible.
We'll talk about what should be done on an international scale, but Ruvi, Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz recent remarks in which he pushed for Turkey to take in more people fleeing from neighboring Afghanistan, which was not the case, of course, geographically,
Not
received backlash from Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, who said Turkey will not be a border guard or a EU refugee camp of the EU. Is Turkey becoming a one, and do you believe that Turkey has reached a breaking point?
Right. So, yeah, I mean, the comments, in addition to, as you've pointed out, being factually inaccurate, are also very troubling because ultimately, part of the crisis in Afghanistan is, of course, a crisis of the withdrawal of NATO and the United States. But it's also the case that the European Union has an international law responsibility to play its part in responsibility sharing for refugees globally. And what it has done in 2016 was to reach an agreement of sort, not a legally binding one, but a statement signed between the EU and Turkey that made Turkey, in effect, a border guard for Europe in return for what were 6 billion euros being paid to support all sorts of services in Turkey. And to some extent, what the European Union is trying to do now is to replicate that with a new deal with a further £3 billion in order to have somebody else deal with refugees rather than it being dealt with in different European countries. And the reason for this historically is that when that wave of refugees has come to Europe in 2015, 2016, there was an attempt to relocate refugees within the European Union, a relocation scheme, and that has led to a revolt from the Visegrad group, from the Czech Republic, from Hungary, from Poland, was ruled unlawfully by the European Court of Justice and led to very little relocation from those frontier countries within the European Union, like Greece and Italy, that have borne the brunt of the migration. And so the European Union, whenever there is migration into the European Union from the Middle East, from North Africa, it leads to an internal political crisis, and so to an attempt to externalize and to move people away from Europe to other countries.
But what should be done then? I mean, to solve this crisis. I mean, what's your take, for example, on Denmark's latest legislation, Rui, to process asylum seekers outside Europe? I mean, could Denmark set an example for other European countries? And what's going to happen to those people in the end?
Yeah, so I mean, this is very, very troubling. A very troubling development. So Denmark essentially passed legislation by a big majority in its parliament, I believe 70-24, saying that asylum seekers will be processed in other countries they've never been to, they have no connections to. There's been rumored that might be Rwanda, and that, of course, is wrong on multiple levels. It creates issues around accountability, because how can you judicially review a process that is done thousands of miles away? How do you provide legal aid? How do you ensure standards? And of course, how do you counter what is ultimately an unfair burden that again falls on countries like Rwanda, perhaps that is already hosting a lot of refugees? And you were right to say, this has been done before. It's been tried and tested and failed, frankly, with the Australian model in Papua New Guinea and Nauru. But it's also the case that other countries are now taking the cue from Denmark. So the United Kingdom government is now, airing out the idea of doing something similar. And they even talked about using something like Ascension Island, which is thousands of miles away from the UK,
Yes.
to process people coming to the UK.
So, Germany's Merkel praised Turkey for taking care of the Syrian refugees, but at the same time said she did not anticipate Turkish membership of the European Union. So, what kind of a working model should be adopted so that the sides share the responsibility and burden equally? I mean, do you believe that this renewed refugee deal is enough?
Unfortunately, no, because as we already tested, the previous model didn't work. And we saw all the problems of the migrants are facing by Turkey. And now we are now challenging with the societal, economic, and some security concerns. If the EU would like to really make a solution about this problem, they should focus on this is the common problem of the world. It is not the problem of the Turkey, which have some borders with those countries. But if the Turkey is now also what we are now living, we are out of our limit and we are also limit of our economic conditions. And if the EU wouldn't like to make this a new way of common working, that the new migrants flow will be start again the EU, as we already seen that just before the pandemic, some migrants, more than 10,000 migrants are moving towards the EU borders because Turkey has already said your conditions should be also participate our way of understanding and making these conditions for the migrants. This is the global problem and the EU should focus on this is not just the problem of Turkey, it is the problem of the globe.
Yes, we talked about the role of the European Union, Ruvi, but why do you think wealthy Gulf countries haven't done enough to tackle this crisis since this is a global issue? And I mean, why they're not part of this, why they're not involved since they're part of these many regional crises and problems?
Yeah, well, I think the Gulf countries are part of a wider phenomenon where the distribution globally of refugees is not regulated by international law, right? There is no mechanism globally to ensure equitable responsibility sharing. It is a question of the luck of the draw in a way of whether somebody ends up in a particular state. And of course, many countries in the global north and indeed the Gulf are trying to fend off people from coming through, through physical barriers, through interdictions at sea, through various legal barriers. And as we've discussed, things like offshore processing centers and safe third country agreements and all these sorts. And so the Gulf countries, in a way, are part of the wider phenomenon globally of an unwillingness of countries that currently don't have refugees or don't host refugees or almost do not host refugees to share the responsibility. And that ultimately can only be resolved through the creation of an international mechanism for more equitable distribution. And for that, you need political willingness, which at the moment doesn't exist on a global scale.
Unfortunately, yes. All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk.